What's happening, fam? My name is John. This is AF Anime. We are back to review chapter 1058 of One Piece, which is titled New Emperors. This title is referring to the three characters in One Piece who have just recently gained the title of Emperor. This, of course, being Luffy, Buggy, Sabo, and their respective crews. A very straightforward title for a very straightforward chapter. But before we get into this chapter's contents, we can talk about the cover page for this week. Now, if you take a look here at the action and dialogue going on, we can tell that the two targets for the surprise gas attack from Caesar Clown were actually Oven and Katakuri. And for the most part, this was kind of to be expected. I've kind of thought the moment that we saw Caesar Clown a handful of chapters ago work his way into this cover story that eventually he is and will end up with the Germa crew and their scientist team. Whether or not he'll do some good there, I honestly can't say, but I have to imagine that at some point soon, we'd have to see some action or at least some gathering of the scientific minds in the One Piece world, as for the most part throughout the entirety of this series, they have all been fairly spread out. So I think that along with the reveal of a character like Vegapunk is something that we can look forward to in the very near future, and heck, even this cover page right here could be leading into that very meeting. Or not, maybe that's just some speculation on my behalf, but for the most part when it comes to this cover page in particular, there isn't a whole lot more to talk about. One thing that is worth noting here, I guess, would be the power scaling put off in this chapter, as we can see that the Germa siblings seem to be pretty worse for wear. We don't have any real imagery of the Charlotte siblings who are present, so I'm assuming they're just covered in gas at the moment, making for a clean escape. But for the most part, I think we can safely say now that Katakuri and Oven would tank all four of the Germa siblings, minus Sanji, of course. But enough of me yapping about the cover page. You guys have heard enough of that already. Let's talk about this chapter's contents, the new emperors. The first of which is going to be Luffy and the Straw Hat crew. And as per usual, when we get out of an arc or a major conflict, we get a slice of life chapter with the Straw Hats on their ship, transporting themselves to the new location, as well as goofing off and revealing their new bounties. The chapter itself starts off with Luffy being berated by Nami for his decision to jump off the waterfall with Kid and Law's crews. Of course, Nami is irate for good reason, and as Jimbei consoles her, she flips out and even shows a tinge of Conqueror's Haki. Now, no, I don't believe that Nami is a user of Conqueror's Haki. It's entirely possible, but I think this is just more a tongue-in-cheek nod from Oda to kind of give us the seriousness of her personality juxtaposed to Jimbei, who's really just kind of getting introduced to the crew, so that way we can kind of understand his dynamic when it comes to interacting with some of this goofy stuff. I mean, Jimbei is more of a serious character. So the good times are rolling on the Straw Hat ship, but for the most part, their presence in this chapter is strictly to tell us their new bounties. So let's go ahead and get that roll call out of the way. Chopper has increased his bounty from 100 to 1,000 berries. Nami has increased her bounty from 66 million to 366 million. Brook has increased his bounty from 89 million to 383 million. Frankie has increased his bounty from 94 million to 394 million. Usopp has increased his own bounty from 200 million to 500 million. Robin has increased her bounty exponentially from 130 million to 930 million. A much more fitting bounty for someone like Robin, who is such a great threat to the world government. Next up is going to be Sanji, whose bounty has increased from 330 million to 1.032 billion. Next up is Jimbei, who increased his bounty from 438 million to 1.1 billion. And then we got Zoro, who had been surpassed by Sanji just before we got to Wano, who was at 320 million and is now at 1.11 billion, making him the second highest Straw Hat under Luffy, who has doubled his bounty from 1.5 billion to 3 billion berry. Now, admittedly, when it comes to the bounty system, the One Piece community has been a bit torn, with some believing that it for the most part has fallen to the wayside as a useless piece of information, but I think with Wano being done that the bounty systems are a bit more important now. As we take a look at these numbers, they are astronomical in comparison to what they used to be when it comes to the Straw Hats bounties. Not only does this emphasize that they truly are worthy of being labeled a Yonko's crew, since we get these high bounties for their quote-unquote senior officers, And that might also seem like a bit of a throwaway line, but when you take a step back and look at it, it really does show the level of intensity that the Straw Hats have come to when it means their viability as a threat to the world government. Not only are these quote-unquote senior officers, who we know as the main Straw Hats, so powerful and so influential, but it also goes beyond them to the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, which is also massive in number as well as their influence. So although we get to spend only a handful of pages with the new Emperor Luffy and his Straw Hats for this chapter, we get a few laughs with some slice of life fun and teasing from the Straw Hats, but we also get this massive information dump from their bounties. So Emperor 1 is out of the way. The next part of the chapter, or at least the bulk of the chapter, is actually dedicated to showing us how exactly the Cross Guild with Buggy was formed. And after reading this chapter, it has become clear that once again, Buggy has gotten lucky and fallen upwards into this position of power and notoriety. And if you need a breakdown of what went down in this chapter, it turns out that Buggy actually took a loan from Crocodile to get his delivery service started shortly after the Paramount War. And then, upon the dissolving of the Shichibukai system, Buggy tried to bail out on his position in general as well as his debt to Crocodile. Crocodile, sensing this betrayal, came to collect, and upon doing so, actually saved Buggy from the Marines who were coming to hunt him down. And then, after Buggy prostrated himself to no end, he agreed to offer all of his services and his resources to promote Crocodile's new business. And in doing so, his loyal followers put him in a position, according to their poster, to be the leader of this Cross Guild. Naturally, this does not look good for the actual leaders of the Cross Guild, Crocodile and Mihawk, and as such they plan on making Buggy pay with his life for this poster mistake. But instead, they correctly rationalize that it's better for them to keep Buggy as a figurehead. In the case that things get too heated, they can either dispose of him or let him take all of the heat for himself. Well, I guess that works out for the duo. But that's not all we get from these three characters. We actually get all three of the Cross Guild members' bounties in this chapter. We know that Crocodile's bounty is now 1.965 billion berry. Mihawk's is 3.59 billion berry. Buggy's is at 3.189 billion berry. So that is an interesting update to the Cross Guild. One thing that is worth noting here is the fact that Galdino has always been loyal to Crocodile, or at the very least, he has never really given up his loyalty for the sake of Buggy. And this should be apparent to most of us, because if you really paid attention to their interactions up until this point, Galdino is basically the only person who has ever seen Buggy for what he actually is, and as such has never truly been loyal to Buggy. Just an interesting dynamic there. But the last part of this chapter, the last 2 pages of this chapter, are dedicated to the third emperor for this chapter's namesake, and that's going to be Sabo, the Flame Emperor. Now, while Sabo doesn't have much of an actual presence for himself in this chapter, we do get a lot of the Revolutionary Army in the 2 pages that they are present, and for the most part it seems that they are happy for the survival of everyone who was present at Marijois, but for the most part it seems that they are curious about exactly what went down, since apparently the group got separated before the whole supposed assassination attempt took place. And we can see from the dialogue with Dragon that he must have some form of an important relationship with Cobra, as he says that Sabo and him will have some beef or some problems if it turns out that Sabo actually did kill Nefertari Cobra. Now, there isn't a whole lot that goes down with the Revolutionary Army in this chapter. It appears that Dragon is going to attempt to get the data or information about what went down at Marijois from Kuma, who appears to be at the beck and call of Dragon. That has some implications that we'll talk about here in a bit, but for the most part, it seems that Sabo is on the line and is about to explain himself to the Revolutionary Army, wherever he might be. So that is going to do it for this chapter's contents. If I had to give it a rating, I'm going to give this chapter an 8.5 out of 10. This chapter was enjoyable. The artwork was basic, but consistent. The story was pretty good, even though we have 3 points of interest for this chapter. It meshed pretty well. And then we have hype, which we got a decent amount. I mean, at the end of the chapter, we have Sabo, who appears to be ready to explain to us what went down off screen at Marijois during the quote-unquote revolution. In any case, artwork, story, and hype are typically the 3 metrics that I use to gauge a chapter rating. And in this chapter, none of them were good, but none of them were bad. So ultimately, I'm just going to go ahead and settle it at that 8.5. So some general thoughts on the chapter. For the most part, when it comes to the Straw Hats and their presence in the chapter, I think it worked perfectly fine. We only had like 3 or 4 pages of them interacting with each other, doing the whole fun on the ship slice of life bit, but us getting the bounties for all the other Straw Hats is important. I mean, I would like to have a little more information about why these characters' bounties have increased so much, and maybe I'll do a video of that here shortly, but for the most part we'll just have to be satisfied with what we've got in this chapter. Now when it comes to the Cross Guild, there are some interesting things to take away from that. For one, we see that Gaudino has always been officially loyal, or at the very least been hoping to a return for Crocodile's crew. And this new business that they're starting up, we don't quite know what it is, but if it is in fact a quote-unquote navy hunting business, then we could be seeing some massive plays coming from these characters within the near future. So Buggy is more hilarious than badass. That is nothing new, but one thing that is interesting to take away from this chapter is the fact that Mihawk's bounty is higher than both Crocodile's and Buggy's. Is even higher than Luffy's. Now, yes, I suppose if they're gauging his bounty based off of his rivalry with Shanks, I suppose that makes some kind of sense, but there is something about Mihawk that I've always felt is probably a bit more important to the story than just him being the world's strongest swordsman. And heck, a 3.5 billion berry bounty is probably leading to that conclusion, and it'll be interesting to see why Oda decided to give him such a high bounty. And I suppose the last thing that is worth talking about for this chapter is going to be Kuma, at least for me. Now when it comes to Kuma, he's only present for one panel for the most part, and it doesn't really appear to be super important, but I think what he does say is a bit revealing. As we see that he talks to Dragon, he says that I am at your command, which kind of implies that Dragon is now his master and no longer the world government. And the only way for that to be the case is if Vegapunk intended on this happening at some point and left it with inside Kuma to be programmed to answer to Dragon and not the world government or the world nobles. Now, ever since the reveal that Vegapunk programmed it into Kuma to protect Straw Hat's ships, I had always gotten the feeling that Vegapunk has kind of a legendary enough status to kind of play both sides of the fence, to do things for and against the world government when he saw fit. And I think the one panel that we get from Kuma in this chapter is incredibly telling of this fact. I mean, if you ask me, this one panel is Oda nodding to us, letting us know that Vegapunk is about to become a much more influential and a much more present player in the world of One Piece. But hey, there you have it. That's going to do it for my review for chapter 1058 of One Piece. It's a great chapter. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite parts were. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the new bounties that we got for everyone in this chapter. Also, let me know your thoughts on whether or not the bounty for Mihawk to you seems important or relevant enough to warrant some questions. Feel free to comment on those or anything else. I'm always here to talk. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It would help me out a lot. And if you've made it all the way through this video, I sincerely thank you for watching. Once again, I am John from AF Anime. I'll catch you guys in the next video.